Welcome back, 21st Century Skills, 7th and 8th graders. I hope you had a great break. As we move on to the end of this semester, we are going to be changing things up a bit as we look at a new way to look at 21st century skills. And we're going to start it off today with some vocabulary and starting a new unit. So you'll want to be logged in to Google Classroom. There's a tool that you're going to need there for recording your vocabulary, and we will be using this sheet throughout the rest of the year probably. So you'll want to keep track of it. But let's talk a little bit about how 21st century skills came about and what the purpose of what we're trying to do. My goal for you in this class is for you to walk out with skills that you could use at school, that you can use at home, that you will use in your personal life, that you will use someday in a job that you go out and you have, and if you decide to go to college or further your education. 21st century skills are about being able to have the fundamental basis to be making the right decisions by using the information around you, knowing how to make the best of that information and to make it work for you. So that's really what our focus is. And we're going to kick that off with a new unit where we're looking at interpretation. Before we go on there, we are moving to using a new scale. And as I've said before, there isn't a reason why everybody in this class shouldn't have a 100%. This class is about growth, and as long as you are putting in 100%, which I would have to say that not necessarily everybody does, but we get out what we put in, right? So the more that you put in, the more that you're going to get out of this class. This is the section we're moving on to. And it has to do with understanding yourself and being able to control yourself, which may sound kind of funny, but it is a skill that we, as we're growing up, need to have. And what we're going to focus on is becoming aware of the power of interpretations. As you can see here, it's all some very fancy teachy language, but there is a scale. And most of you may be around this area, the 2.0 area. I don't know. We're going to find out. You should be in the 1.0 to 2 area, and we're going to look for growth. And so let's say you're at a 1.0, we want to get you to a 2. If you're at a 2, we want to get you at a 3. If you're at a 3, we want to get you to a 4. And you have the ability to move through those places throughout time. But we will be referring to these scales, and you'll have access to some copies. But I just kind of wanted you to see, when we're talking about growth, what we're looking for. So right now, we want you to be, as a student, be able to describe characteristics of misconceptions, which we'll be talking about. You can describe situations where different interpretations might lead to misunderstandings or conflict. You can describe or recognize your own interpretations, and you can explain the basic processes for managing interpretations. And it does go up from there, but you're doing the right thing if you get here, and then we work on growing. So that's just really the point that I wanted to make for that. As I said before, the section that we're moving on to is called Managing Interpretations. And I want you to sit and think about, what do you already know about the word interpretation, or what do you think about when you hear that word interpretation? And to me, it really is about knowing, I guess, how I understand something. When I hear a word, what is my interpretation of it? When I see a person, what is my interpretation of it? What does my brain tell me about that? What conclusions do I jump to? What decisions, or another term you may have heard is called preconceived notions. We have those about people, places, things, smells, things that we touch based on our experiences in life. So we're going to do a little test, and I want you to keep this to yourself as you see it, all right? We're going to do a little test, and you may have seen this before, but some people haven't, so let's take a look at it. What do you see? I'm going to move this aside and see. What do you see? What's the first thing that you see? Can you see more than one thing? We'll take a minute to just take a look at this. All right, so let's think about this. Did you see the old woman or the young lady first? Which one did you see? Were you able to see anything? Were you able to see both of them right away? Is that because you've seen it before? Or you were just able to recognize both pieces right away? If you didn't see both of them the first time, eventually, were you able to see both of them? Did somebody have to give you some hints to see that? Or did you just need some more time to look at it? I'd like you to get at the end of this and talk with a neighbor about what they saw and their differences. Why do you think people would not see the same thing? And have you ever experienced a situation where you thought one thing happened and someone else thought something else happened? And think about why that might occur. One example that comes to mind for me quite often is when people get into an argument. There will often be, if you've heard the saying, always listen to both sides of the story. Or maybe you had something that you said sometime that hurt somebody's feelings and you didn't mean it that way, but that's not the way they felt. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about interpretations. We'll have it happen in the news. We have it happen in our personal relationships, our jobs, at school, at home, out in public. You know, somebody may just make a gesture or throw a look and you take it one way when it was really intended to be something else, or maybe didn't intend to be anything at all. Another area that I see this a lot is in the interpretation of reading an email. And you, as your young age, don't experience this all the time, but you can think of it maybe with tweets or posts that get taken the wrong way. When the printed word can have a different interpretation based on how the person is reading it, and they may take something in a totally different way. So when we're talking about interpretations, this is what we're going to be taking a look at. All right. Before we go to lunch, I'm going to introduce you to a way that we're going to be taking notes for vocabulary. Now, vocabulary is a very important factor in your future. And as you're preparing to go out into the world, having a robust vocabulary is very important. And it's not something that is normally always learned in school. Usually we're learning it through reading and different types of things and in the context. But we're going to spend some time focusing a little bit more on vocabulary because it's very important. So in your Google Classroom, there is a document that you're going to pull up. It'll make your own copy for you. But this is your 21st century vocabulary, and we're going to be adding to this throughout the rest of the year. Now, I don't want you to get all worried today, and really for just like the next week or so, we're focusing only on 3 words, and it may even be the next 2 weeks. We'll just kind of see how long this takes us to do. But we're going to be adding 3 words, and we're going to be doing it in a more focused way so we really cement the understanding of this vocabulary for you ongoing because, again, it's something that you're going to use in a multitude of areas. So this is called the Frayer model. And you may have seen it early on in elementary where you did a lot of different things like this. And you don't always have to do one word per page. But when you are writing down definitions, it can help you to cement the information in your mind more if you use a model like the Frayer. In this box, we would put the definition. And it's always better, really, if you put it into your own words if possible. You will remember it better that way. If you do write it word for word, write it in your own words on the next line so you have something to refer back to. Facts and characteristics goes to things that pop out at you or maybe be something that you really need. It's important for you to remember. This really comes to mind when I'm looking at vocabulary for science or things like that. Writing those important facts down are important, or characteristics that you should look for. It can be very hard to use that word in a sentence, but it's a good way for you to cement that word and then also show that you understand its true meaning. I think a lot about last year when people would say things like, "You copyrighted me," when that shows to me that they kind of have a grasp of copyright but don't know it totally because they're using it wrong in a sentence. So when you use a word wrong in a sentence, that indicates that you're not really in tune with what that word means. So it's important to use it in a sentence to cement that understanding. And then over in this section, illustrations and examples. I always find that tying in a personal example from my life or something that was easy for me to remember helps me understand that definition. Whenever you can make a personal connection, it's going to cement that understanding in your brain through the connections. Or drawing a picture is also very helpful, especially if you're a visual learner. And since we're not doing this on paper, I always think taking notes on paper is better, but we're going to try doing it digitally. You can cut and paste to your heart's content to help you remember those words. So I've done a little example for you here because we want to get ready, like I said, to go to lunch. The definition for our first word is going to be on perception or perceive. And so I do have an example that we will look at later. And so I've actually done most of the work for you on our first section. But this would be somewhat of an example of how things would be filled out. So to be ready for part 2, you want to make sure that you have this document pulled up and you're ready to go. When we get back, we will dive in to the perception or perceive portion of our learning today.